The observation deck of the Caltheron research vessel hummed with its usual mechanical breathing, a sound that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat over the past 3 cycles. I am Vex's Talon, xenobiologist, 2nd class, and I had spent the better part of my career studying the galaxy's most dangerous predators. I had documented the hunting patterns of Rigelian spinewolves, catalogued the territorial behaviors of Andromedan razorhawks, and even survived a close encounter with a pack of Centaurian death lizards. But nothing, absolutely nothing in my 2 decades of field research had prepared me for what I was about to witness on that backwater planet humans called Earth. "Vex, you need to see this," chirped Krill, my assistant, her 3 eyes blinking in rapid succession, which in our species indicated either extreme excitement or severe indigestion. Given that she had just finished a protein cube, I assumed the former. I shuffled over to her monitoring station, my posterior legs clicking against the metal flooring. The screen displayed a thermal readout of Earth's African continent, specifically a region the natives called the Kalahari. Red and orange blobs dotted the landscape, indicating various heat signatures of the planet's frankly ridiculous variety of fauna. "What am I looking at?" I asked, adjusting my optical enhancers. "That," Krill pointed with her secondary appendage, "is a human juvenile. Approximately 4 solar cycles old, according to our databases. He somehow wandered away from his family group during their migration across the territory." I leaned closer. The small heat signature was indeed moving, albeit slowly, through an area marked as hostile on our danger maps. My stomach sacks clenched. Human juveniles were notoriously fragile. Their species took an absurdly long time to reach maturity, spending years in a state of near helplessness that would get any sensible creature eaten within hours. "Where are the adult guardians?" I demanded. "Approximately 6 kilometers northwest. They have not yet noticed the juvenile's absence." Fantastic. Just fantastic. I had filled out enough incident reports in my career to know exactly how this would end. The juvenile would encounter one of the continent's numerous apex predators. Said predator would do what apex predators do, and I would spend the next month explaining to the Galactic Ethics Committee why I had not intervened to save an endangered sentient species member. "Continue monitoring," I sighed, "and prepare the intervention shuttle. We might need to wait," Krill interrupted, which was unusual. She knew I hated being interrupted. "Something else is approaching the juvenile." The screen flickered, and a new heat signature appeared. Smaller than I expected, quadrupedal, moving with purpose directly toward the human child. I pulled up the visual feed, enhancing the image until I could make out details. "By the 7 moons of Cathara," I breathed. "Is that?" Krill's voice rose to a pitch that made my auditory sensors ache. "A honey badger?" It was indeed a honey badger. Mellivora capensis. I had read about them, naturally, during my preliminary research on Earth's fauna. They were categorized in our databases as, and I quote, "evolutionarily confused rage beasts with a death wish and a complete absence of survival instinct. They were known to attack creatures 50 times their size, consume venomous snakes as casual snacks, and possess skins so thick and loose that they could literally twist around inside it when grabbed by predators. The humans, with their characteristic understatement, called them fierce. The rest of the galaxy called them proof that Earth's evolution was supervised by a committee of sadists. This is bad," I muttered. "This is very, very bad." The honey badger approached the human child, who had apparently decided that the middle of the Kalahari Desert was an excellent place for a nap. The juvenile had curled up, beneath a scraggly acacia tree, tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of sleep. Innocent, vulnerable, completely unaware that he was about to become a statistic. I reached for the intervention controls. My primary duty was to observe, not interfere, but there were exceptions for situations involving endangered sentience and imminent death. A honey badger versus a sleeping human child definitely qualified. But then something happened that made me freeze, my manipulator hovering over the emergency transport button. The honey badger stopped. It sniffed the air, its small black eyes surveying the area with an intelligence that our sensors had somehow failed to properly document. Then, Instead of attacking the child, it sat down. Right there, approximately 2 meters from the sleeping juvenile. It simply sat down and began watching. "What is it doing?" Krill whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow be heard across the vast distance between our ship and the planet below. "I have no idea," I admitted. "Cross-reference this behavior with the database." Krill's fingers danced across her console. "Nothing. This is not documented honey badger behavior. They are supposed to be solitary, aggressive, and oh, wait, here is something." "What?" "There is a note in the human research files. Apparently, there have been rare instances of honey badgers displaying protective behaviors toward other species. Very rare. Extremely rare. Essentially unheard of outside of anecdotal reports that most serious scientists dismiss as fabrication." I watched the screen, my confusion mounting with each passing moment. The honey badger had not moved. It sat there like a furry, compact guardian, its gaze sweeping the landscape with methodical precision. "Increase surveillance to full spectrum," I ordered. "I want to know everything happening within a 5-kilometer radius of that location." The sensors complied, and suddenly our screens lit up with new information. And by lit up, I mean they practically screamed warnings at us in every color the Caltheran light spectrum could produce. "Oh no," Krill said softly. "Oh no indeed." 3 heat signatures were converging on the child's location. Large signatures. Very large signatures. I pulled up the visual identification, though I already suspected what I would find. Hyenas. 3 of them. Adults. Probably weighing 45 kilograms each. Spotted hyenas, to be specific. The kind with jaws powerful enough to crush bone and a pack mentality that made them efficient killers. And they had definitely noticed the sleeping human child. The honey badger, which stood perhaps 30 centimeters tall and weighed maybe 12 kilograms soaking wet, noticed them too. Instead of doing the sensible thing, which would be to quietly vacate the area and let nature take its violent course, the creature did something that made my biological understanding of self-preservation completely collapse. It stood up and growled. Not a warning growl. Not a fear growl. This was a growl that somehow conveyed, across species and even across the vacuum of space to my observation deck, a very simple message that roughly translated to, "Try it. I dare you. In fact, I double dare you, you mangy excuses for predators." "This is insane," I said, watching as the honey badger positioned itself directly between the hyenas and the sleeping child. "It is going to get itself killed." "Should we intervene?" Krill asked. "Not yet. Let us see how this develops." The hyenas, for their part, seemed as confused as I was. They approached cautiously, which was smart, because honey badgers had a reputation even among Earth's predators. The lead hyena, a scarred female who had clearly seen her share of conflicts, circled to the left, testing for weaknesses. The honey badger turned to face her, its body language radiating a confidence that was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Possibly both. Then the hyena lunged. What happened next occurred so fast that I had to slow down the playback to properly observe it. The honey badger moved like liquid violence, twisting aside at the last possible moment and latching onto the hyena's leg with jaws that seemed entirely too strong for such a small creature. The hyena yelped, a sound of pain and surprise, and tried to shake the badger loose. This proved difficult, as honey badgers possessed a trait that could only be described as weaponized stubbornness. Once they locked their jaws, they did not let go. Not for anything. Not if their lives depended on it. In fact, especially not if their lives depended on it. The hyena thrashed, rolled, and tried every trick in her considerable arsenal to dislodge the furry terror attached to her limb. The other 2 hyenas watched, apparently reconsidering their life choices. Meanwhile, the human child continued sleeping, completely oblivious to the battle being waged for his survival. "Humans," I muttered. "They can sleep through anything." The honey badger released its grip, not because it was tired or injured, but because it had decided the hyena had learned her lesson. The scarred female limped backward, blood dripping from puncture wounds, her eyes now showing something that might have been respect or possibly just terror. "Smart hyena," The honey badger turned its attention to the other two. It made a sound that I could only describe as a combination of a hiss, a growl, and somehow the audio equivalent of a raised middle digit. The universal gesture of defiance, transcribed into pure vocalization. The hyenas looked at each other, then at the honey badger, then at the sleeping child, who probably weighed less than one of them and would be easy prey, then back at the honey badger, which weighed less than their collective breakfast but was somehow scarier than a fully grown lion. They made their decision. They left. 3 adult hyenas, apex predators in their own right, simply turned around and trotted away from a creature 1/10 their size because said creature had made it abundantly clear that any attempt to reach that child would result in pain, suffering, and possibly a re-evaluation of their entire existence. Did that just happen? Krill asked. According to the sensors, yes. Reality is apparently optional on this planet. The honey badger watched until the hyenas disappeared from view, then calmly returned to its position near the child. It sat down again, resuming its vigilant watch as if fighting off 3 large predators was just a minor interruption to its day. I should have ended my observation there. I should have filed a report, noted this as an anomalous behavior, and moved on to less psychologically damaging research subjects. But I was curious, which is both a xenobiologist's greatest asset and their most dangerous liability. Maintain observation, I instructed. I want continuous monitoring until the juvenile returns to his group. That could be hours. Vex. I am aware. Prepare stimulant beverages. This is going to be a long night. And it was. Oh. By the ancestor spirits, it was. Over the next 3 hours, the honey badger defended that sleeping child from no fewer than 7 potential threats. A jackal that got too curious. A monitor lizard, looking for an easy meal. 2 more hyenas, different from the first group, who apparently had not received the memo about the tiny demon creature standing guard. A martial eagle that swooped down from the sky only to receive a face full of angry badger. Even a cobra, which the honey badger dispatched with such casual efficiency that I began to suspect these creatures did not understand the concept of venom. Spoiler alert, they did not. Honey badgers possessed a resistance to snake venom that bordered on the supernatural. They could take bites that would kill creatures 10 times their size, sleep it off for a few hours, and wake up angry enough to track down the snake and eat it out of spite. Earth's evolution was clearly being run by entities with a dark sense of humor. Through it all, the human child slept. He shifted occasionally, made small noises, even smiled at one point, probably dreaming of whatever human juveniles dreamed about. Toys, perhaps, or food, or the simple joy of wandering away from supervision and giving their guardians heart palpitations. The honey badger never left. It maintained its post with a dedication that would shame most professional soldiers. Every rustle in the grass received immediate investigation. Every shadow got scrutinized. Every potential threat got assessed, categorized, and either deemed acceptable or forcibly removed from the vicinity. This is unprecedented, I said, making notes that grew increasingly frantic. There is no evolutionary advantage to this behavior. The badger gains nothing from protecting the human. In fact, it expends significant energy and takes considerable risk. This makes no biological sense. Maybe, Krill suggested quietly, it is not about biology. I turned to look at her. What do you mean? Maybe the badger is protecting the child because it decided to. Not because of instinct or evolution or survival advantage. Just because it chose to. I considered this. Choice. Agency. The decision to do something not because genetics demanded it or because of some calculated survival strategy, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The concept was philosophically complex and made my brain hurt. That is a terrifying thought, I admitted. That implies a level of consciousness and moral reasoning that we have not documented in non-sentient species. Maybe we have been looking at Earth's creatures wrong, Krill said. Maybe humans are not the only ones on that planet who make choices. Before I could respond to this unsettling philosophical direction, the sensors chimed with new information. The human family group was approaching. They had finally noticed the juvenile's absence and were now frantically searching the area. I could see 5 adult humans moving quickly through the terrain, calling out in their primitive but oddly musical language. The honey badger heard them too. It stood, gave the sleeping child one last look, and then, without any fanfare or expectation of gratitude, simply walked away. It disappeared into the tall grass, leaving no trace except the various injured predators it had scattered across the landscape, and one very confused xenobiologist aboard a research vessel. "Wait, that is it?" Krill protested. "It just leaves? No acknowledgement? No reward?" "Apparently. But the humans do not even know what happened. They will think the child was just lucky. They will never know about the badger." "Perhaps," I said slowly. "That is the point. The badger did not protect the child for recognition or reward. It protected the child because the child needed protecting." We watched as one of the adult humans, likely the child's parent based on the frantic body language, spotted the sleeping juvenile and ran toward him. The parent scooped up the child, who woke with a confused expression and probably no memory of his accidental adventure. The other adults gathered around, relief evident in their gestures and vocalizations. They looked around, probably trying to understand how their offspring had survived completely unharmed in one of the most dangerous environments on their planet. They would never know the answer. They would call it a miracle, or luck, or divine intervention, depending on their cultural beliefs. They would never know about the small, fierce creature that had appointed itself guardian for no reason other than it seemed like the thing to do. "Earth," I said, leaning back in my observation chair, "is a very strange place. Should we include this in our report?" Krill asked. I thought about it, then thought about the questions it would raise, the debates it would spark, the philosophical implications of what we had just witnessed. Yes, I decided, but no one is going to believe us. Does that matter? No. I smiled, as much as my species could smile. No, I suppose it does not. The human family group departed, carrying their oblivious juvenile back to safety. The honey badger was long gone, probably off to terrorize some other unfortunate creature, or maybe just take a well-deserved nap after its unpaid babysitting shift. And I sat there, on my observation deck, realizing that I had just witnessed something that would change how I viewed not just Earth, but the entire concept of what it meant to be alive in this galaxy. Somewhere on that strange, violent, beautiful planet, a honey badger was going about its day, completely unaware that it had just taught a xenobiologist a lesson about courage, choice, and the unexpected places where heroism could be found. The report I filed that night became something of a legend aboard the Caltheran research vessel, not because anyone believed it, mind you, but because it served as excellent entertainment during meal cycles. My colleagues would gather in the common area, read excerpts aloud, and laugh until their respiratory sacs hurt. "Tell us again about the magical friendship badger," Torque would wheeze between fits of laughter. Torque was a planetary geologist who thought biology was a soft science anyway, so his opinion carried about as much weight as a hydrogen atom. I endured the mockery with as much dignity as I could muster. Science, after all, was built on the foundation of ridiculous ideas that eventually turned out to be true. Someone once suggested that tiny invisible organisms could make you sick, and they got laughed at too. Now we had germ theory. But the incident haunted me. I kept returning to the footage, watching it over and over during my off hours. The way the honey badger moved, the calculated efficiency of its defense, the choice it made to stay when every survival instinct should have told it to run. 3 weeks after the incident, I was still obsessing over it when Krill burst into my quarters without announcing herself, which was rude even by human standards, and humans barely had standards. "Vex, you need to see this right now," I groaned. The last time Krill had said those exact words, I had ended up watching a human attempt to ride an earth creature called a crocodile while intoxicated. The human survived somehow, because of course he did, and I had needed medication for my stress glands afterward. If this is another human doing something stupid, it is the honey badger, she interrupted, her eyes all three focused on me with unsettling intensity. The same one. It is doing it again. That got my attention. I followed Krill to the observation deck at a pace that was definitely not running, because senior xenobiologists did not run through corridors like excitable juveniles, even though that was exactly what I was doing. The main screen showed a different location, deeper in the Kalahari, near a human settlement that barely deserved the name. A few structures made from local materials, some primitive water collection systems, and a lot of very optimistic farming attempts in soil that looked about as fertile as a vacuum. There, Krill pointed. I saw the honey badger immediately. Same distinctive markings, same confident waddle, same aura of barely contained violence. But this time it was not alone. Walking beside it, holding what appeared to be a stick for protection that would protect him about as well as wishful thinking, was a human child. Different from the first one. This juvenile appeared older, maybe 6 or 7 solar cycles, with darker skin adapted to the harsh sunlight and hair cropped close to his head. Audio, I commanded. The sensors complied, and suddenly the observation deck filled with the sound of a human child talking constantly, talking without pause, talking as if silence was a personal enemy that had to be defeated with an endless stream of words. And then Mama said I could not go to the watering hole alone, but I said I am big now, and she said big does not mean smart. And I said I am smart too. I know not to bother the crocodiles, and she said it is not the crocodiles I am worried about, and I said, what else is there? And she said, everything, Marcus. Everything is dangerous. And I said, I will be careful, and she said, the child, apparently named Marcus, continued his verbal assault on the universe, while the honey badger trotted alongside him. The badger occasionally looked up at the child with an expression that I could only interpret as long-suffering patience mixed with the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, this tiny human would eventually need to breathe and stop talking. How long has this been going on? I asked. We picked up the pair approximately 30 minutes ago. According to the tracking data, they have been together for at least 2 hours. 2 hours of listening to that? I stared at the honey badger with newfound respect. That is a stronger creature than I gave it credit for. Marcus continued his monologue, moving from the topic of his mother's concerns to a detailed description of his breakfast, which apparently involved something called porridge that he did not like but ate anyway because his grandmother made it, and you did not disrespect grandmother's cooking even if it tasted like, quote, sad paste. The honey badger kept pace with the child, and I noticed something interesting. It was hurting him. Subtly, yes, but definitely hurting. Every time Marcus started to veer towards something potentially dangerous, a ravine, a patch of unstable ground, a particularly aggressive-looking thorn bush, the badger would shift position, forcing the child to adjust his path. It is shepherding him, I breathed. Look at the movement patterns. It is deliberately guiding the child away from hazards. But why? Krill asked the question that was eating at my brain. What possible reason would it have? Before I could formulate a theory, the sensors started screaming warnings again. Because of course they did. Nothing involving humans and honey badgers could ever be simple. Multiple hostiles approaching, Krill reported, her voice tight with tension. Large pack. Canine signatures. Looks like wild dogs. African wild dogs. Lycaon pictus. Highly social hunters with one of the highest success rates of any predator on the continent. They hunted in coordinated packs, could run at speeds exceeding 60 kilometers per hour, and took down prey through exhaustion and teamwork. A single honey badger and a chatty human child would make an excellent meal. How many? I demanded. 12. No, wait, 14. They are converging from multiple directions. This was bad. This was very, very bad. One honey badger had managed to drive off individual threats through sheer audacity and violence, but 14 coordinated hunters? That was not a fight. That was a mathematical certainty of death. Prepare the intervention shuttle, I ordered. Authorization code VEX 77 Omega. We are pulling them out. VEX. The regulations can be explained to the board after we prevent the death of a sentient species member. Move. But even as Krill rushed to comply, I knew we would not be fast enough. The shuttle needed time to launch, enter atmosphere, and reach the surface. The wild dogs would arrive in minutes, maybe less. On screen, the honey badger had stopped walking. Marcus, oblivious as only a human child could be, continued talking for a few more seconds before noticing his companion had halted. "Why did you stop, Mr. Badger? Are you tired? Mama says I should not walk too fast because not everyone has energy like me, and I said I have lots of energy, and she said, 'Yes, Marcus, we know, the whole village knows.'" The badger made a sound. A low, rumbling growl that cut through Marcus's verbal barrage like a blade through soft tissue. The child finally, blessedly, went silent. "Mr. Badger?" The honey badger turned to face the direction of the approaching dogs. Its body language had changed. No longer the casual guardian trotting alongside an annoying but harmless juvenile. Now it was a warrior preparing for battle, and I realized something that sent chills through my thermal regulation system. It knew. Somehow, it knew this was not a fight it could win, and it was going to fight anyway. "Marcus," I whispered to the screen, as if the child could hear me across the vast distance. "Run. Please be smart enough to run." But Marcus was a human child, which meant he possessed curiosity in quantities that violated all reasonable safety protocols. Instead of running, he moved closer to the badger, clutching his useless stick. "What is wrong, Mr. Badger? Is something coming?" The wild dogs burst from the tall grass like violent poetry. 14, sleek, efficient killers moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. They spread out, surrounding their prey, cutting off escape routes with practiced ease. The honey badger placed itself between Marcus and the dogs. The child, to his credit, had finally realized the severity of their situation. He raised his stick with trembling hands, trying to look brave and failing completely. "Shuttle status," I barked. 30 seconds to launch. Estimated arrival time at surface, 4 minutes. Too long. Way too long. The lead wild dog, a scarred male with gray around his muzzle, approached slowly. Behind him, the pack tightened their circle. This was not hunting. This was execution. They had done this dance 1,000 times before, and they knew exactly how it would end. Then something happened that made me question everything I thought I understood about Earth's ecology, human-animal interactions, and possibly the fundamental nature of reality itself. Marcus started singing, not screaming, not crying, singing. A high, clear voice that cut through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. The words were in one of Earth's hundreds of languages, something rhythmic and repetitive that I did not understand but felt in my thorax anyway. The wild dogs hesitated, just for a moment, but they hesitated. And in that moment, the honey badger attacked. What followed was not a fight. Fights had rules. Fights had structure. This was chaos given physical form and set loose upon the world with a vendetta against the concept of order itself. The honey badger moved through the pack like a berserker, all teeth and claws and absolute refusal to acknowledge the reality of its situation. It latched onto legs, tore at ears, twisted inside its loose skin when grabbed, and generally made every single dog regret their career choices. But there were 14 of them. For every dog the badger drove back, 2 more pressed forward. I watched in horror as the inevitable began to unfold. The badger was tiring. Even rage had limits, and biology was a harsh master. Marcus kept singing, his voice growing louder, more desperate. Tears streamed down his face, but he did not stop, did not run. He stood there with his useless stick and his brave, breaking voice and sang. 20 seconds to surface, Krill reported. Not fast enough. Never fast enough. Then I heard it. A sound that made my circulatory system freeze. A sound that humans had been making for thousands of years when their young were in danger. Shouting. Multiple voices. Adult humans, running toward the commotion with weapons that were primitive but effective. Spears, bows, clubs, tools designed with one purpose, to end threats. The wild dogs heard it too. Predators possessed excellent survival instincts, and those instincts were currently screaming at them that the risk-reward calculation had shifted dramatically. 1 honey badger and a child were acceptable losses for a meal. 1 honey badger, a child, and an entire group of angry adult humans wielding sharp implements. The pack scattered. They melted back into the grass, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only dust and the memory of violence. The honey badger collapsed, just dropped where it stood, sides heaving, covered in bite marks and blood. Some of it was probably the badger's own. Most of it belonged to dogs who were currently limping away and questioning their life decisions. Marcus rushed to the fallen creature, dropping his stick, his singing replaced with sobs. "Mr. Badger! Mr. Badger! Please get up!" The adult humans arrived moments later. They assessed the situation with the quick efficiency of people who lived in an environment that regularly tried to kill them. One woman, presumably Marcus's mother based on the way she immediately grabbed him and checked for injuries, spoke rapidly in their language. Marcus replied between sobs, gesturing at the honey badger. The adults looked at the small creature, then at each other, having a silent conversation that transcended species barriers. One of the men, older, with scars that suggested he had his own history with the Kalahari's predators, knelt beside the honey badger. He examined it carefully, speaking in low tones. The badger raised its head slightly, fixed him with a glare that promised violence if this examination became too invasive, then laid its head back down with a huff that sounded almost annoyed. "Shuttle arriving in 30 seconds, Krill announced. "Should I recall it?" I watched the screen, watched as the humans carefully lifted the honey badger, Marcus hovering anxiously beside them, watched as they began carrying it back toward their settlement, the child talking again, this time telling the badger that everything would be okay, that his grandmother knew medicine, that the badger could stay with them until it felt better. "Recall the shuttle," I said quietly. "They have it handled." Over the following weeks, I monitored the situation with an attention to detail that probably crossed into obsession. The humans had taken the honey badger into their settlement. They treated its wounds with surprising skill, using plant-based medicines that actually worked according to our medical censors. Marcus apparently appointed himself the badger's personal nurse, which meant the creature was subjected to constant supervision, regular snacks, and an endless stream of one-sided conversation. The honey badger tolerated this with the patience of a saint, which was impressive considering it was a species known for having less patience than a supernova. After 2 weeks, the badger's injuries had healed enough for it to leave. The humans left the enclosure door open, making it clear the creature was free to go whenever it chose. It stayed for 3 more days. I watched as it followed Marcus around the settlement, keeping a watchful eye on the boy who had stood beside it during the fight, watched as it accepted food from the grandmother who had treated its wounds, watched as it even tolerated being petted by some of the younger children, though its expression suggested it was doing so under extreme protest and would be filing complaints with management later. On the 4th day, it left, simply walked out of the settlement in the early morning, when most of the humans were still sleeping. Marcus woke up to find it gone and cried for an hour straight, which was apparently standard human juvenile behavior when dealing with loss. But here is the thing about honey badgers on Earth. They have territories, and that settlement fell squarely within this particular badger's territory. Over the months that followed, the badger returned regularly, not to stay, but to check, to patrol, to ensure that the tiny, chatty human who had stood with it was safe. I documented every visit, watched as Marcus grew more confident, venturing farther from the settlement because he knew his fierce guardian was watching, watched as other children began to recognize the badger, greeting it like an old friend rather than a potential threat. The adults started leaving out food for it, not as payment, but as a gesture of respect between neighbors. The badger accepted these offerings with regal dignity, as if it was entirely natural for apex predators to receive tribute from tool-using primates. "I am writing a paper," I told Krill one evening as we watched the badger accept what appeared to be a piece of cooked meat from Marcus's grandmother, about interspecies relationships on Earth, about how the planet's hostile environment has created bonds that should not exist according to standard evolutionary models. Will anyone believe it? No, I admitted, but that does not make it less true. What will you call it? I thought about the honey badger, standing guard over a sleeping child for no reason except it chose to. About Marcus, singing while surrounded by predators because giving up was not in his species' vocabulary, about humans and animals, forming partnerships based on mutual respect rather than domestication. Unlikely guardians, a study of choice-based mutualism in Earth species, I said, with a focus on why honey badgers are proof that the universe has a sense of humor. That last part will not make it past the review board. I know, but it should. Months became cycles. Cycles became a full solar year. The honey badger continued its patrols. Marcus continued growing. And I continued observing from my distant vantage point. The xenobiologist, who had stumbled onto something that textbooks could not explain and equations could not capture. On the anniversary of my first observation, I received a transmission from the Galactic Ethics Committee. They had finally gotten around to reviewing my report. I expected censure, maybe a formal reprimand for considering intervention in a natural process. Instead, I got a single-line response: request full documentation and continued study. Others are reporting similar phenomena. We need to understand this. I sat back in my chair, mandibles clicking with surprise. Others are reporting similar phenomena. That meant I was not alone. That meant other researchers, on other parts of Earth, had witnessed their own impossible partnerships between species that should have been enemies. Krill, I called out, how would you feel about extending our mission? She appeared in the doorway, a beverage cube in each hand. I thought you might say that. Already filed the paperwork. You are a fine assistant. I know. Also, you need to see the new footage from Marcus's settlement. I pulled up the feed, expecting another routine patrol. What I got instead made me laugh. A sound that humans would have found disturbing but which in my species indicated pure joy. Marcus was not alone. 3 other children from the settlement were with him, and they were all following the honey badger like it was leading a tour group. The badger, for its part, seemed to have accepted its role as the world's most dangerous babysitter, leading the children safely through the territory while they chattered away about their day. It has gone from protecting one human to protecting multiple humans, Krill observed. That is an expanding behavioral pattern. Or, I suggested, maybe the badger just likes Marcus's friends. You are getting sentimental in your old age, Vex. Perhaps. Or perhaps I am finally understanding what makes Earth special. Which is, I gestured at the screen, where a honey badger and 4 human children were investigating something in the grass, the ancient predator exercising infinite patience with the young of an entirely different species. Choice, I said simply. On most planets, animals act on instinct. Sentients act on reason. But on Earth, sometimes a creature just decides to care about something for no logical reason at all. And that choice, that illogical, beautiful choice, creates bonds stronger than any evolutionary imperative. That is very poetic for a scientist. Blame Earth. It does strange things to perspective. We watched until the sun set over the Kalahari, turning the sky into shades of orange and red that our scanners could measure but could never truly capture. The honey badger led the children back to their settlement, saw them safely to their homes, then wandered off into the twilight to continue being exactly what it was: a small, fierce creature that had decided protecting silly humans was a worthwhile way to spend its existence. And somewhere aboard a research vessel, 2 xenobiologists made notes that would eventually change how the galaxy understood not just Earth, but the very concept of compassion across species lines. Because if a honey badger could choose to guard human children, then maybe, just maybe, the universe was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than any of us had imagined. The report was filed, the evidence was documented, the observations continued, and Marcus grew up knowing that somewhere in the Kalahari, he had a guardian unlike any other, a fierce friend who had taught a scientist from across the stars that sometimes the most important discoveries cannot be predicted, calculated, or explained. Sometimes they just happen because one small creature decided that protecting others was more important than protecting itself. That, more than anything else in my long career, was worth studying.